Hello and welcome to Auspol Explained. I'm your long curly-haired host, David, and today let's get a little bit speculative. What would happen if the United Kingdom abolished the monarchy before Australia became a republic? We share the same person as king. Would this not suddenly cause constitutional problems? Does it automatically make us a republic? Does that mean that Charles has to move into Kirribilli? Well, get ready, because I have two options for this hypothetical scenario with varying degrees of plausibility. This is Auspol Explained's non-copyright infringement version of Marvel's What If? Now, of course, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. They won't admit me to the bar, or pub, or even a cafe where other lawyers hang out because they don't like me. But when has lack of expertise stopped anyone on the internet from commenting on a subject? So let's begin with the more realistic option. Option 1. The monarchy continues, it just needs to find a new house. So story time, children, and also adults. Once upon a time, there was the British Empire, and one indivisible crown. And I don't mean the hat with the stolen diamonds on it, I mean the abstract idea of the sovereignty of Britain and all its lands. It was a singular concept that had the same legal power and authority anywhere in the empire. There was the crown. But in the early half of the 20th century, a spell was cast and it got split. Now we have the monarchy of Australia, the monarchy of Canada, the monarchy of Jamaica, the monarchy of Great Britain, and so forth until we get all 15 Commonwealth realms, like a colonial infinity gauntlet. The British, unlike the French, chose not to physically divide the monarch into several different pieces. Instead, all those countries share the same person as sovereign, but that person acts in a different capacity for each country, and is subject to different legal restrictions and requirements based off the laws of that particular country. So there no longer is the singular British crown, there is a metaphysical individual crown for each place. It really gives a new spin to the term the royal we. So if the UK decides to evict the Windsors and turn Buckingham Palace into a dedicated tourist museum, then that could mean that Charles is still king of 14 other countries. He's been fired from one job, but luckily his ancestors found a way to give themselves the same job a dozen times over by turning it into a franchise. So he just needs to find a new place to live. Luckily for him, he wouldn't need to deal with the rental market because the Governor-General of whatever nation he decides to move to already has a residence. It's usually called Government House, except in Jamaica where they call it King's House, which saves time on rebranding if Charles needs to move there. As the Governor-General is just there to do the duties of the monarch on their behalf while they're absent, that means if the king moves permanently to a new country, then that country's office of Governor-General is no longer necessary. Charles can effectively fire the Governor-General, abolish their office entirely, and evict them so he can take their house. How convenient! That is assuming that he doesn't move from the UK, like he does have property there, separate to the fact that he is the king. You know? Like, he's not going to be homeless. No one panic. King Charles is not going to be homeless. Option 2. We simultaneously have a monarchy and a republic intertwined in a weird but not unheard of way. Option 1, of course, is the realistic option, but that probably isn't the most satisfying answer. So what else could hypothetically be possible? Well, in a weird way, we could attempt to interpret our constitutional relationship with the Crown to no longer actually apply to the British Crown, but not become a republic in a wibbly-wobbly way. I want to preface this by pointing out that while the individual segments of what I'm about to say are technically correct, the overall argument I'm about to create is silly garbage and should not be taken seriously. But it's also silly to think the UK would abolish the monarchy before Australia itself chose to become a republic, so this is just an AU fanfic anyway. Let's just roll with it and let me lay down some technical groundwork, okay? You've almost certainly encountered a poorly researched nonsense argument about the Constitution on the internet before. Well, get ready for a well-researched nonsense argument about how the Constitution works. Let's go. So if you've ever read the Constitution, you will know that the very beginning of it says that the people of the various colonies have agreed to unite in one indissoluble federal commonwealth under the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. This affirms two things. First, that we have a constitutional monarchy linked to the British, and second, that the nation of Australia is distinctly different to sugar in that when it gets wet, it doesn't dissolve. However, while there are several crowns split like light refracting into a rainbow empire, there is still this sense of unity, and I don't just mean that there's only one person as monarch. The Statute of Westminster in 1931 was an agreement that the dominions of the British Empire had equal status as the UK, and therefore could govern themselves in their own right. It removed most of the British Parliament's ability to legislate for those countries. Asterisk, not all of it, but that's complicated, so whatever. But it does say that if there was a change to the line of succession, that all countries, united by common allegiance to the crown, should unanimously agree. What happens to one crown happens to all of the crowns. The monarchy is a big fan of unions after all, and has been since 1707. But back to Australia's constitution. There are a few clauses at the start called covering clauses. The second one states that the Australian Constitution applies to the heirs and successors in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom. Now, that was written meaning those who inherit the throne from Queen Victoria and her descendants, but just because the Constitution has words in it that we've interpreted one way in the past, doesn't mean we will interpret them the same way in the future. Section 44, for example, disqualifies people from being in the federal parliament if they have the citizenship of a foreign power. When the Constitution was written, there was no separate Australian citizenship. That did not exist until 1949. Before then, we were all just British subjects, and so it didn't matter if you were born in the UK, Australia, or anywhere else the British Empire had claimed dibs, you could be a member of the Australian Parliament. Nowadays, you need to have solely Australian citizenship. Same words, different interpretation and application. We also don't interpret words to be strictly literal as they are written, but understand the intention insofar as it is practical to apply them. For instance, the Constitution says Queen all the way through it because it was written while Queen Victoria was on the throne. It doesn't mean that the Constitution suddenly didn't apply during that period where we had a few kings over the past 120 years. Also, the royal family has not always been the same, and the line of succession has changed multiple times in the past. And if you want a Wikipedia deep dive to chew up time, just look up alternative lines of succession to the English and British crowns. There's no guarantee that a future monarch would be a direct descendant of Victoria. So the Constitution can't literally mean this document only applies to people whose 23andMe test results came back with a genetic risk of haemophilia. So with all that in mind, one could make the argument, you shouldn't, but you could say that the successor of the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, in practical terms, just means whoever is the head of state of the UK. And if the UK becomes a republic, well, that would mean we are referring to the President of the United Kingdom. Therefore, whenever the Constitution says Queen, well, it could just be interpreted to apply to President of the UK instead. Now, again, not a good argument, but it can and does work. Our system is already built around the idea of our head of state being someone who doesn't live in Australia. The Governor-General is a role created for the sole purpose of doing the duties of the monarch in the monarch's absence. Plus, there is already a contemporary, real-world example of someone who is the head of a republic acting in the capacity of a monarch in a different country. Yes, that's right, let's talk about the French. The French president is automatically the co-prince of Andorra. It could be possible that whenever we need a new Governor-General, the Prime Minister of Australia recommends to the President of the United Kingdom someone to appoint to the position. We could therefore maintain a pseudo-version of our monarchy, not change anything about the Constitution, but also not have the Windsors as the automatic successors of Australia's head of state role. I think it would be kind of funny in that scenario because it would mean that the UK went through the whole process of getting rid of their own monarchy, only for Australia to force the idea of the monarchy back onto the new president. Congratulations! You get to replace King Charles, quite literally, in multiple ways. You made this happen. Of course, like I said, this is a silly interpretation of the Constitution. It's flimsy, it's bad, it ignores all the things that I mentioned in option 1 about how the Crown works, and if you ask any constitutional expert their thoughts on it, they'll say, who are you and why have you wasted my time with this? But hey, isn't it nice to use the power of imagination? So yeah, our system of government wouldn't necessarily need to change in practice, but it would naturally bring up some discussions about the future of Australia. Should Australia remain a monarchy, or become a republic itself? And hey, speaking of that specific kind of discussion exactly, I recently did an interview with both a member of the Australian Republic movement and the Australian Monarchist League to hear their opposing views on whether or not Australia should become a republic or stick with its system of constitutional monarchy. Those two interviews are linked in the description. I spent so much time on them and they did not get enough views. They really did not. They really did not. Please check them out. So hey, if you've made it this far, go check them out. They're both serious examinations of the respective arguments about a republic and a constitutional monarchy, and I encourage you to check them both out and critically compare and contrast them. It also will benefit me and all the time that I put into it so I can feel validated, but also like genuinely it's an important discussion to have and learn about. And there you have it. Let me know in the comments section which hypothetical scenario you prefer. King Charles moving to a new country or our head of state becoming a foreign president. And also comment down below your also alternative theories about what could happen. It's all just, you know, speculative. It's never gonna happen. We can say whatever we like. Isn't it fun? Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that and actually learned a few things with all the information I snuck in between all the silly nonsense. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon who not only get to support me, but see episodes like this early. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time.